have got 2 chapters that I want to get through. And so to do that, there's quite a few bits of material I've got to skim over. So I warn you, there's not going to be a detailed account of all the names in verses 28 to 27 of chapter 46. And you're not going to get a comprehensive apologetic for the way Joseph governs Egypt in chapter 47. In fact, I'm not going to have time to mention that at all. So if that's going to keep you up at night, not knowing what I think about it and not knowing what it is, just come and see me afterwards and I'll explain it. We're going to keep it simple tonight. So we've got 3 points and we will draw our lessons as we go. Point number 1, when it comes to Genesis 46 and 47, is that God guides. God guides. Now, last week we learned about the wonderful providence and sovereignty of God, didn't we? Joseph had finally revealed himself to his brothers, and he reassured them that they were forgiven and that it was God who had guided them all to this point. God had turned their evil and used it for good, so that a remnant might be preserved, so that there would be many survivors, so that the nation of Israel would flourish. And we left last week with Jacob hearing the news of Joseph's survival and provision. Pharaoh had sent down a load of wagons to Canaan, and he's invited Jacob to come back and move to Egypt and live out the famine in comfort. And the last verse of chapter 45 says this: Israel said, "It is enough. Joseph, my son, is still alive. I will go and see him before I die." So maybe at the start of chapter 46, we expect to hear Jacob packed up immediately and he arrived in Egypt a few days later. But actually, that's not what happens, is it? Look what it says. Israel took his journey with all that he had and came to Beersheba. Now, Beersheba was at the southernmost bit of Israel. There it is, in the tribe of Simeon eventually. It was considered the southernmost point of the promised lands. And so the question is, why is Jacob stopping there? Well, verse 1 goes on to tell us that Jacob offered sacrifices to the God of his father Isaac. So Jacob is going to be very cautious in making the decision to leave Canaan. After all, Canaan is the promised land. Now we might think, come on mate, I mean this is obvious, it's obvious you should go. God's clearly calling you to Egypt. But Jacob isn't so sure. Before he makes this big decision, he wants to consult the Lord. He wants to consult Yahweh, the God of his father. And so he goes to Beersheba. God had already had dealings with both Abraham and Isaac on this very spot. Isaac had built an altar to the Lord there, and Jacob uses probably that same altar to again seek an audience with the Lord. And it works. So look at verse 2. God spoke to Israel in visions of the night and said, Jacob, Jacob. It reminds us of when God called Abraham. Remember, he says, Abraham, Abraham. Jacob said, here I am. And verse 3, then he said, God said, I am the God of your father. Do not be afraid to go down to Egypt. Now, I might be asking, what is Jacob actually afraid of at this point? Is he worried that he's going to get, it's a bit of a hassle moving, isn't it? You've got to pack stuff up. He's getting on. Is he wondering about the schools in Egypt? Are they good for the kids? Are they good, bad, or outstanding? What's he worried about? Well, no, Jacob is fearful about disobeying God. That's his prime fear. And there were probably 4 things on his mind. So, 4 things concerning Jacob about going to Egypt. Number 1, God had told Abraham, remember, that his descendants were going to end up as slaves for 400 years. That's in chapter 15, verse 12. So maybe Jacob thinks me going to Egypt means that him and his family are going to end up in bondage. So rather than go there and have a great time, they're instantly going to be taken into slavery. He didn't know when the 400 years of bondage would start. Secondly, Abraham had told Isaac, Jacob's dad, to remain in the land. Chapter 24, verse 8. Thirdly, God himself had told Isaac to remain in the land during a famine. So now there's a famine, and Jacob thinks, well, can it be right for me to leave? He told my dad to stay. And fourthly, think about Jacob's life. He had spent 20 years trying to get back into Canaan, trying to get back to the promised land from his father-in-law, Laban. So despite what Jacob is seeing with his own eyes, despite what circumstances are saying, he wanted confirmation from the Lord's. Well, there's a simple lesson for us then, isn't there? Understand that we can read providences wrongly. We're in a different boat to Jacob because we have access to the whole counsel of God. We've got the Bible completed, all right? This is the revealed word of God's. But nevertheless, to go against God's revealed will in the Bible because we consider circumstances favourable is a grave mistake and a sin. So, I was trying to think of an example. Here's one. A young lady has been praying for a boyfriend, a husband, a man who loves God. And a man who loves God, a man who loves Jesus. And then at work, who should walk through the door but a very handsome, very religious young man? But the problem is, this young man doesn't worship the same God that she loves. Maybe he's a Jehovah's Witness. He worships a different Jesus, a false Jesus. But he ticks all the other boxes, right? He's polite, he's kind, morally he's principled, he won't have sex before marriage, he's honest, he's hard-working. Surely the circumstances mean that she should accept his offer of a date. Well, of course not. Don't be unequally yoked, says God's word, right? So, Christian friend, be aware preferable circumstances are not always God's seal of approval. You've got to make your decisions prayerfully, carefully, and always after studying and delving into his words. Having said all that, what is God's answer to Jacob? Well, it's yes, you can go. You've read the circumstances right. You've read my provision correctly. He says, for there I will make you into a great nation. You will not be wiped out. Instead, you will multiply. You'll prosper. The promises made to Abraham are going to be fulfilled in Egypt. And better still, verse 4, God tells him, I myself will go down with you, and I will also bring you up again, and Joseph's hand shall close your eyes. So God says, look, you're leaving the land, you're leaving Canaan, but you're not leaving me. I'm coming with you. And there's an eternal promise too, isn't there? I'll bring you up again. So, in other words, you'll be resurrected into the promised land. Even though Joseph is going to close your eyes in death, you're coming back. God is being very gracious to Jacob. He's reassuring him that he's going to die contented with his favourite son at his bedside, certain that he would one day receive the inheritance promised to him. Well, look, the promise made to Jacob is the same promise God makes to his people today, isn't it? For the time being, we are in the world, we're in Egypt, but whilst we're in Egypt, whilst we're toiling away in this realm, the Lord is with us. He's come down with us. He walks with us. But he also reassures us that he will bring us up again. As Paul says to Timothy, the Lord will rescue me from every evil deed and bring me safely into his heavenly kingdom. Christian friend, the Lord guides us through our earthly pilgrimage. And look, the Lord fulfills his promise. So turn over to chapter 47, verse 27. Look what happens. Thus, Israel settled in the land of Egypt, in the land of Goshen, and they gained possessions in it, and were fruitful and multiplied greatly. So they begin to become this great nation that God said they would become. And they're a distinct nation. They're in Egypt, but they're a separate people. Verse 28, Jacob lived in the land of Egypt for 17 years. So the days of Jacob, the years of his life, were 147 years. And when the time drew near that Israel must die, who's there? Well, he called his son Joseph and said to him, "If now I've found favour in your sight, put your hand under my thigh and promise to deal kindly and truly with me. But let me die with my fathers," verse 30, "carry me out of Egypt and bury me in their burying place." Joseph answered, "I will do as you have said." And he said, "Swear to me," and he swore to him. Then Israel bowed himself upon the head of his bed. Basically, that means that Jacob prays to God at the end of his bed. But why is Jacob so keen to be buried in Canaan? Well, it's an outward sign of where his hope lies, isn't it? His hope rests in the promises that God has made to him. His hope rests in the Lord who revealed himself to his forefathers. So he says, look, don't leave me here. Don't leave me in this cursed foreign land of Egypt. Take me back to Canaan. Take me back to the garden, the place where God is going to be. Take me back to the place where I'm going to be resurrected. Let's rewind though. Let's go back to chapter 46. Jacob has consulted with God, and now look what he does. Verse 5. Then Jacob set out from Beersheba. The sons of Israel carried Jacob, their father, their little ones, and their wives in the wagons that Pharaoh had sent to carry him. They also took their livestock and their goods, which they gained in the land of Canaan, and they came into Egypt. Jacob and all his offspring with him, his sons and his sons' sons with him, his daughters and his sons' daughters. All his offspring he brought with him into Egypt. And then in verse 8 to 34, as I said, we get a list of some of the people who made this journey. And we're told in verse 27, all the persons of the house of Jacob who came into Egypt were 70. Now, this is really important. Numbers in the Old Testament, particularly for ancient writers, were not treated like we treat numbers today. In the modern world, we consider statistics to be mathematically reliable. That's what we want, all right? We expect things to be done accurately to the point. So on the news, you'll often hear that the interest rate has gone up or down by 0.25%. Companies have to produce detailed accounts. Everything has to be accurate and recordable. But ancient writers didn't operate in that way. It didn't mean they were lying, right? It's not they were trying to pull the wool over our eyes. It just meant that they used numbers, they saw numbers differently. Numbers were sometimes used symbolically. And this number 70 here, in verse 27, is a prime example. Now, we know this number must be symbolic because at the start of verse 27 it says, the sons of Joseph who were born to him in Egypt were 2. So, the sons of Joseph born to him in Egypt couldn't have entered Egypt because they were born there. And look at verse 12. The sons of Judah, Onan, Shelah, Perez, and Zerah. And we're reminded, we looked at it way back, and Onan died in the land of Canaan. So they're numbered as going into Egypt, but they died in Canaan, so they couldn't have gone into Egypt, yet they're numbered in the 70. So this 70 is a symbolic number. The question is, what is it symbolising? I'll ask you, wake you up a bit. Any ideas? What do we know about numbers in Genesis? I'll start you off with a clue, otherwise we're just going to be here all night. 70 is 10 multiplied by what? 7. Good. Some maths, brilliant. What was 7 a picture of in Genesis? Almost. Fullness, completion, right? So yeah, there's 7 days in a week. God finishes work, he completes his work, and he rests on the 7th day. Everything's ready. What was 10 a number of? The 10 Commandments are in Exodus, though, aren't they? Not in Genesis. No, I might have to remind you. 10 is the number of God's order. Do you remember the creation, the world is made, the universe is made using 10 words from God. It says, and God said 10 times in Genesis 1. So, what we've got here is a perfect ordered set of people. We've got every last Israelite leaving Canaan and going to Egypt. This is the complete family, the chosen seed of the woman. So there would have been more people that went in. That's the point, right? But we're told, look, this is exactly what God wanted. So whether it was 70, 80, 90, 140, this is the way God planned it. This was in his plan. Notice how, unlike with Abraham and Isaac, there are no prodigal sons. So there's no lost sons. There's no Ishmaels. There's no Esau's. All of Jacob's sons pass into the land. They're all included. And it's all been organised. It's all been ordered by God. This is his sovereign will. As I said, in Genesis 1, the phrase God said appears 10 times in the creation account. So here we have 7 times 10. This is a fresh creation event. This family is the means by which God is going to bless the whole earth. This is the creation of the special family. Okay, that's the first point. Got through a lot. Second point, God guides. Next, God provides. Now, back in the late 80s, I must admit, British television was at its absolute peak in my eyes. And the queen of Saturday nights was Miss Cilla Black, all right? Yeah? And she hosted a show called Surprise, Surprise. Who remembers Surprise, Surprise? Jim's like, no. He didn't reach Scotland. I'm not going to do the theme tune, all right? But Cilla would start off on the sofa with usually an older lady from up north, and they usually had massive glasses because it was the 80s. And we'll call her Ethel. Poor old Ethel. The parents got divorced. 2 of the kids went with mum. One brother, Clive, of course, went with dad. And, you know, we haven't seen him for 30 years. We've no idea where Clive is. Well, Cilla says, surprise, surprise, Chuck. We've flown Clive in from New Zealand. And Clive would come out, and they'd all hug. And then Cilla, this was hilarious, Cilla would get up and she would start singing the theme tune. It was great TV. But I suppose the problem is that being British, of course, it was all very subdued. So that's why I put these guys up. Like, they haven't seen their dad for 45 years, and they're just as calm as Hindu cows. Like, you know, they're just there. So maybe in other cultures it would have gone over a bit. There's no emotion whatsoever. Well, look, the reunion between Joseph and his father, Jacob, would have been a very Middle Eastern affair. There's no stiff upper lips. There's no repressed reactions. Instead, there's just an outpouring of weeping, an outpouring of joy. Look at verse 29. Joseph prepared his chariot and he went up to meet Israel, his father, in Goshen. He presented himself to him and fell on his neck and wept on his neck a good while. You can imagine it, can't you? They don't want to let one another go. They've not seen each other for 22 years, and they sob and they hug for ages. Jacob's prayers have finally been answered. So much so that he's now fully content. Look, he says, verse 30, Israel said to Joseph, now let me die, since I've seen your face and know that you are still alive. His son is everything to him. Knowing that he's safe and healthy means that his work in this life is done, basically. He's succeeded as a father. He says, now I can die happy. All right, I'll take this. But God is not done blessing Jacob, is he? In fact, it only gets better from here. God is going to provide for his whole clan. And verse 31 of chapter 46 to verse 6 of chapter 47 details the provision that Pharaoh makes for his new arrivals. And I suppose there's just 2 things we can pull out from here, right? Number 1, the welcome they receive from Pharaoh in chapter 47 is very much an official welcome. So we know already from last chapter, Pharaoh is the one who sent wagons down to Jacob. So he already knows they're coming. So this is their official state welcome. So it's all very formal. It's all very, okay, let's do all this. And notice verse 6, how God moves Pharaoh's heart so that he provides the brothers with employment. He's providing for them. Since you shepherds know about the animals, he says, if you know any able men among them, put them in charge of my livestock. God has provided Jacob's descendants with not only a place to live and security, but now there's food and full employment. That's the first thing to notice, God's provision. Second thing, and this is important, despite being in Egypt, the Israelites do not become Egyptian. And Joseph in particular is keen for his family to keep their distinctiveness. He knows that the Egyptians worship demons, basically. That's what they're worshipping. They're worshipping false gods, demons. Whereas he and his father worship the true living gods. Look at chapter 46, verse 33. When Pharaoh calls you and says, what is your occupation? You shall say, your servants have been keepers of livestock from our youth, even until now, both we and our fathers, in order that you may dwell in the land of Goshen. For every shepherd is an abomination to the Egyptians. Joseph wants his family to survive, but he doesn't want them to be absorbed into the rest of Egypt. And so he exploits the fact that the Egyptians hate shepherds. Shepherds are an abomination to them. They loathe shepherds. Now, we're not sure why this was the case. Probably they saw shepherds and herdmen as kind of backwards. They're nomads, they've got no culture, they've got no buildings, they're simple. And so they're thinking, no, we don't want nothing to do with them. Egypt, of course, was the centre of the world, wasn't it? Magnificent pyramids reached up into the sky. There are amazing buildings, statues, temples. But here are these odd little people, and they live in tents. They worship a God they cannot see. So Joseph uses this hatred to his own advantage. He can set up a buffer zone between the two groups of people. And that means his people will keep their traditions, their culture, and, crucially, their gods. Now, funnily enough, this week, I was listening to a Christian podcast, and the brothers on it kept on banging on, or harping on, about how the church should take strides to reflect the culture around us, or the culture of the area it's in. We've got to be culturally relevant. That's the idea. On some church websites, you'll have a Meet the Team page, and every bio is a church officer, and they're trying to prove to the outside world just how normal they are. So, there's another Clive. Where's Clive gone? Yeah, so Clive, he's a coffee connoisseur. His favourite singer's Ed Sheeran. He likes motocross. And it's all with the goal of saying, look, outsiders, look, we're just like you, really, at the end of the day. But Christian friend, make no mistake. We might have the odd thing in common with our unsaved friends and relatives, but scripturally, we should be nothing like them. There should be a clear distinction between that zone and this zone. The church in the UK needs to stop trying to pretend that we are normal. We ain't. Think of the things we believe, right? We believe that God made the world in 6 literal days, simply by the power of his breath. We believe in a global, worldwide flood. We believe in angels and demons. We believe in the virgin birth of a perfect human being called Jesus, who is God. We believe that this man, Jesus, died and came back to life again on the 3rd day. We then believe that this man floated off into heaven and that one day he's going to come back and judge the whole world. Because of that belief, we alter the way we live. We make decisions that the outside world would never make. We meet on a Thursday night, and as far as they're concerned, we spend an hour talking to the ceiling. Christian friend, you ain't normal. Stop pretending that you are. You're in the world, but you're not of the world. The world should find us and our way of life odd. We should be an alien people to them. That's not to say we don't welcome people in and try and make them feel welcome, but they should find this place a bit odd. They should find us a bit strange. Okay, third and final point. Jacob's pilgrimage. After being welcomed into the land, Joseph is able to present his father to Pharaoh, the king. So although Jacob is an old, frail man, who at this point needs to be carried around by his sons, they're carrying him everywhere, spiritually he is far greater than Pharaoh. And so he enters the palace with the intention of blessing Pharaoh. He's going to pray for him and his people. And again, the covenant with Abraham is being fulfilled, isn't it? Those who bless you, I will bless, says the Lord. So the two men have a chat, and Pharaoh asks him how old he is. This is probably going to sound really obvious. But he probably asked Jacob how old he is because he looked really, really old, right? Now, it's easy to guess whether someone's in their 20s or in their 40s, isn't it? There are telltale signs. But let's be honest, when people get to the latter stages of their life, it begins to get harder and harder to guess their age, and it gets, rude sometimes to ask their age. It's dangerous to ask their age. Some 90-year-olds look like they're in their 60s, and some 70-year-olds look like they're 102. So Pharaoh, seeing this ancient old man, he wants to know how old you are. What's your story? How long have you been around? And so in verse 9, we get Jacob summing up his whole life. Now, think about Jacob. We've travelled with him through half of this book. We've had lots of sermons about him. How does he sum up his adventure, everything we've learned about him? Well, he tells us three things we'll tie the sermon up with, right? 3 lessons we learn about Jacob's life, and as a result, we learn about our lives. Thing number 1, Jacob tells us, is that life is a pilgrimage. So verse 9, Jacob said to Pharaoh, the days of the years of my sojournings are 130. Now, sojourning is a weird word. We don't use it much. It simply means to stay somewhere temporarily. So I don't sojourn in my home. I sojourn at a hotel or a B&B. I sojourn for a while in a hotel, but then I return to my home. Remember, Jacob and his father and his grandfather are men that dwell in tents. They're what we call nomads. They had no permanent address. Jacob, as he lived his life, has always been aware that the land he walks on is not really his homeland. He's simply a pilgrim. He's passing through. He's an alien in a foreign land. Where's he heading to? Well, the writer of the Hebrews tells us. I haven't written down what chapter it is, I'll tell you later. Some chapter in Hebrews, verse 9 says this, by faith, Abraham went to live in the land of promise, as in a foreign land, living in tents with Isaac and Jacob, heirs with him of the same promise. For he was looking forward to the city that has foundations, whose designer and builder is God. They desired a better country, that is a heavenly one. Therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared for them a city. Well, Christian friends, simple question. Do you consider yourself a pilgrim? We're not a culture who live in tents, are we? In fact, there seems to be an almost psychopathic desire in this country for people to buy a house. They say, oh, you've got to buy a house, you've got to invest in property, you've got to get on the ladder, you've got to build up your portfolio. Now, I'm not saying in any way that home ownership is sinful, right? Don't misread what I'm saying, don't misunderstand. But do you see the mental shift in our psychology, even as Christians? As if bricks and mortar in Catford or Lee or Bromley should be our ultimate goal. Christian friend, how tied to this world are you? Understand, if you're blessed enough to own your own home, it is nothing more than a sturdier tent in which you currently sojourn. Spiritually, your current home, whether you own it or not, is like a Premier Inn. You've all stayed in hotels, like Premier Inn's pretty good, aren't they? You're there a couple of days, but no sooner have you gone than a new visitor arrives in your room. Your bed becomes their bed. Your shower becomes their shower. Your toilet seat is sat on by them. Well, look, that's going to happen to every asset we own, isn't it? Talking of toilets, I had to pick out a new bathroom for the manse this week, looking at tiles, taps. I say I had to pick out, I just stood there as Keely made all the decisions, right? But you're fitting it out, you're trying to, you love your house, you're making it nice. But one day, every room in your house, all of those items, you took such care making decisions about, the taps, the colour of the curtains, the tiles, the door handles, all that stuff is going to be stripped out, gutted, and those rooms are going to be refurbished to suit someone else's taste. Christian friend, your house is a motel room. It's a tent that must one day come down. Remember that you are a pilgrim and a stranger in this world. Okay, second thing we learn about Jacob's pilgrimage is that it's short. It's a short pilgrimage. The days of the years of my sojourning are 130 years, he says. Well, hang on a minute, Jacob. 130, that is super old. That's so old, critics of the Bible say it can't possibly be true. No one lives to 130. And we know from verse 18 that Jacob's going to live for another 17 years on top of this. How can he call it short? He says, few and evil have been the days of the years of my life. They've not attained to the days of the years of the life of my fathers in the days of their sojourning. Abraham lived 175 years. Isaac lived 180 years. So Jacob is going to fall well short of that figure. And so in his mind, he feels somewhat robbed. He feels like he hasn't achieved as much as Abraham and Isaac. Despite 130 years, he still doesn't consider it long enough. And that's something we still observe today, isn't it? No matter how old people get, they still don't think that it's long enough. People will sometimes say to me, I was very sad so-and-so died suddenly. I say, oh, sorry to hear that. How old were they? Oh, they were 96. I was like, oh, well. And yet the person who suffered the loss still feels robbed, don't they? They feel like they needed more time with that person. And the reason we feel that way, the reason we feel that life is too short, is because in reality it is. Humanity was never designed to die. We were designed to live forever. God created Adam and Eve to live permanently with him in the garden, with access to the tree of life. But because of our rebellion, our lives have been cut short by God. And therefore our lives never feel long enough. Therefore, Paul says to the Ephesians, be very careful then how you live, not as unwise, but as wise, redeeming the time because the days are evil. The psalmist tells us to number our days. Be aware, Christian friend, that your days are limited. Your pilgrimage is very short as you move towards that new and better country. In fact, you'll know the older you get, the quicker it seems to go. Okay, third and final thing Jacob tells Pharaoh is that his life has been difficult. It is a painful pilgrimage. He says, few and evil have been the days of the years of my life. The Hebrew word here for evil is miserable. He says, I have had a miserable experience. My life has been full of pain and unhappiness. Jacob, in this reflective mood, recognises that his life has been scarred by treachery. It's been scarred by the treachery he suffered at the hands of other people. But at the same time, we know that this was just reward for his early days of trickery and lies. Remember, Jacob, the name, means grasper, usurper, deceiver. He deceived his brother Esau. He'd spent the years after that deception paying the price. He spent 20 years in total in Haran, having to work for his uncle Laban, who deceived him. He spent 7 years working for Leah, a wife he never wanted, a wife he resented, a wife he didn't want. And then the wife he did want, Rachel, died during childbirth, and his favourite son Joseph was ripped from his grasp, and he'd spent the last 22 years mourning for him as if he was dead. And only now, at the very end of his life, are things beginning to look up. But at this stage, Jacob's strength has left him. That's the problem with retirement, isn't it? By the time you're ready to hang up your boots, you've got no energy left to enjoy all your free time. Everything aches. Verses like this remind us that our lives are not meant to be a bed of roses. That's what a lot of churches want to infer today, isn't it? Coming to Jesus is great, they say, because Jesus is going to solve all your problems. He'll solve your social problems, he'll solve your employment problems, he'll solve your family problems. With enough faith, you can be wealthy and healthy and socially stealthy. I don't know what that means, but it rhymes. Jesus is there, they say, to sort of oil the cogs of your life, to empower you so you can achieve your dreams. And we see this in a wider context. A society, we see that is hypersensitive to mental health issues. So the minute you feel depressed or low and life looks a bit gloomy, well, the society says that's a problem. If you're thinking like that for any length of time, you must be sick, you must be unhealthy. Stop thinking negatively. So you better medicate or you better do something to cheer yourself up. What does Scripture say? Psalm 90. The years of our life are 70, or even by reason of strength, 80. Yet their span is but toil and trouble. They're soon gone and we fly away. Job 5 verse 7, man is born to trouble as the sparks fly upwards. Christian friend, do not be surprised that your life is painful. In fact, understand that it's painful for a reason. The Bible tells us, expect pain. What's the reason? Well, let's turn as we close to Romans chapter 8 and verse 22. Romans 8:22. That is on page 944. Romans 8:22, what Paul says. For we know, Christians, we should understand, we should get this. We know that the whole creation has been groaning together in the pains of childbirth until now. Paul says the whole universe is in agony, it's in misery. Verse 23, not only the creation, but we ourselves. Even we, he says, who have the first fruits of the Spirit. We're saved, we believe in Jesus, but this life still hurts. Jesus isn't an aspirin or a paracetamol. He's a soul saver, not a pain reliever. We ourselves groan inwardly as we wait eagerly for adoption as sons, the redemption of our bodies. Christian friend, there is a reason that you groan and you ache and you creak. And the reason is that you're a pilgrim. You do not belong in this world. You're simply passing through it. If your faith is in the Lord Jesus Christ, then you have a God who guides and provides your whole journey through. But it's a journey to a new and better country, where finally your pain will cease, your tears will be wiped away, and you'll no longer sojourn. Instead, you will finally live, and you will finally be home with him.